Hello, everybody, and welcome back to segment 2 of the last day of API Days Hong Kong 2022. You're watching stage 2, and before we begin, let me remind all of you in the audience to check out the Partners Village and support all of our sponsors. First of all, I would like to introduce, as our first speaker of this last segment, Matt. He is the head of developer relations at Moesif. Hi, Matt. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Hi, Simon.
You can, and I can see you as well. Today, you're going to talk a little bit about creating great developer experiences with metrics and automation. Is that right?
Exactly.
Perfect.
Yep.
All right. I'll hand the mic to you, and you can get started whenever you want.
Great. Thank you very much. All right. Well, really excited to be here talking at API Days Hong Kong. Yeah, let's get right into it. So what we're going to be chatting about today is creating great developer experiences with metrics and automation. And this is something that we might not think about as much when we talk about APIs and stuff like that, but I think it's extremely important for us to make sure that our developer experience is something we keep in mind. Quick little background on who I am. So I lead the DevRel team at Moesif, and really that just focuses on developer experience and developer education. So, and if you do want to get a hold of me, you've got any questions for me, my email is matthew@moesif.com. All right. So again, we're going to make this, when we look at APIs and we look at products in general, we really are looking at kind of the same stuff. So when we look at web metrics, so when we think about metrics, we usually think about web metrics, and those are really top of funnel. So we're looking at stuff like, average read time, pages viewed, session time, video plays, comments. These types of things are extremely high level and might not mean a whole lot to us, especially when we think of it from an API perspective. So let's not think about it at the API level. Let's think about it at the onboarding level, or when people are coming to first use our product. These types of things are great, but we know that someone viewing some documentation for our API isn't necessarily meaning that they're having a good developer experience. Let's go to the next slide here. What do we actually care about when it comes to developer experience? And it goes really, really far beyond just page views and other, vanity metrics. When we're talking about developer experience, we want to look at stuff like adoption. We want to look at stuff like engagement and usage. And we also want to look at retention. So when we're talking about adoption, this is who is actually using our product. How are they integrating with the product? Then we look at engagement and usage. So once they've actually adopted the product, how are they using it? Why are they using it? And we want to see what kind of volumes they're doing. We want to look at these kind of deep metrics. And the last is retention. So obviously, if someone's adopted the product, is using it, you want them to keep on using that product, whether it's an API or whether you have, a mobile app, whatever it is. You want to make sure that that retention part, that you have a returning customer. And we're going to go a little further into that. There's different ways to make sure that you're looking at that correctly. Now, most of us developers know that great developer experiences share a pretty similar amount of things in common. And that is, I think number one would be product functionality truly serves a problem. So whether we've built a product or whether we've built an API, in order for someone to have a good experience with that, we really want it to solve a problem for them. The next thing is great documentation and tutorials. So this, I would say, especially from a DevRel perspective, this is massive. Everyone has documentation, very few people do it well. So making sure that we have the documentation and tutorials there and written well is important. And then we have the easy integration and onboarding. So we can write and we can solve as many problems as we want, but if it's really hard to use our product, that's going to be very tough for us. Now, the last one, which is one that we might not think in terms of developer experience, but is very crucial, is stability and scalability. So you imagine you've solved the problem, you've got great documentation and tutorials, you've got easy integration and onboarding, but you have zero stability and you can't scale that product or that API, that's going to heavily impact the enjoyment of that developer. So that the developer experience is going to go down. Now, when we look at all these things, how do we actually identify if we're doing this stuff well? And that's where we want to talk about identifying gaps in developer experience through metrics. Now, from a DevRel perspective, we always want to make sure that we are looking at metrics and not just going by gut feel. So let's look at a few ways that we can see this. So this is one that I focus on really heavily, especially at Moesif, is, look at your sign up and onboarding journey. So this is a basic funnel that we would see here, but imagine if, we have this page visit. So we have page visit, then we have sign up, and then the stuff in orange would actually be where they're maybe using our API. So we want to look at kind of both sides of that. How do people find out about our API and come to their initial page visit? Then we want to figure out how they're signing up. So another thing is to make sure, how long is it taking them to sign up for an account with our product or our API? And we also want to know what percentage of people are doing that. So, if we look at this here, what we find is that we go maybe from 60% down to 30% reduction in people that are actually going from page visit to sign up. So if we improve that experience, maybe we can bump up those numbers a little bit. Then we might see this here where people that are signing up are not necessarily making their first hello world call. Is there a way that we could improve that? By making sure that we're looking at our entire journey, that's how we can really start to dig into what is the developer experience with our product from the initial stages of learning about the product through to the last piece, which is realized value. And that's what we're talking about, actually solving business problems. A way to do that is to measure that engagement through a user funnel. So, in something like Moesif, what you would see is we're able to do, a first step, a second step, and then a third step. And this is where we can start to look at stuff like maybe people log in or sign up for the first time, then they make their first call to the API, and then they make more calls to that API. We're able to see how many people are signing up and then actually using that API. Now, why is this important? Well, there's actually two reasons. We can see what we're doing well, and we can also make sure that any changes we make aren't making things worse. So if we make a change, for instance, maybe we make our initial hello world call, which is the second one, a little bit easier, we might find that our conversion rate goes up. More people are using the API. If we've made some changes that have actually made it harder, then that might impact that developer experience. And then we might see that engagement goes down on that call. We want to look at timeframes to make sure that any changes we're making to that developer experience are being tracked through the metrics. Now, another thing that really helps is actually segmenting the data as well. So if we have, let's say we're able to segment by company, we may have some companies that are having a better developer experience or a better experience with the product than others. By segmenting this data, we can actually go through and see, okay, the companies that are experiencing good developer experience, let's go off and chat with them to see why they're having a developer experience. And then we can also chat with the ones that are having a bad or a poor developer experience and figure out how we can make it better. And that really is something that you need to make sure that you're doing when you're looking at metrics, is don't just assume. Sometimes you're able to go out and get qualitative feedback based on this quantitative type of breakdown. So you want to make sure that you're trying to understand it by segment as well. Now, how do we measure developer engagement with it? So when we talk about this would be more from a higher web perspective, but what would be bad way of doing it would be page views or API calls, right? So if we just go by pure volume, that's probably not a great way for us to measure developer engagement. A better way to do it might be weekly active tokens. So these might be API tokens that people are using to access it. But again, not great, because one developer could have 30 tokens, and that's going to throw off our metric. The last thing that we want to look at, which is the best, would be weekly active users. So that's breaking it down to the user level to be able to see who is our top users, who are users that we might want to, bump up their engagement. And that engagement usually directly ties to the developer experience that they're having. Now that we've looked at that, what we want to look at is using automation to improve the developer experience. Now, I'm a huge fan of automation because there's a lot of things that you can do as a developer. That means that you don't have to bump up your workforce necessarily, and you don't have to bump up the hours that you're spending. You can use automation to bring through stuff that, and let's be honest, a lot of us developers, we'd rather have something automated guide us than have a salesperson reach out to us or a customer success person reach out to us. We like to be on our own. If we can have something that automatically is helping us or guiding us, that's the way to do it. So a few easy automation steps can improve your developer experience exponentially. And we see this every single day at Moesif, where companies are using our product or other products as part of their stack that are helping to make things go much smoother for developer experiences. So the first one would be using emails and in-app notifications to guide users. So if you're familiar with any type of product-led framework, you're going to see that having these bumpers, which is really what all four of these really talk about, is super important. So what we want to do is we want to use emails and in-app notifications to essentially make sure that if users are going off path, we can bring them back. We might also look at creating governance rules to stop users from going off track. So this could be anything from, when we usually think of governance, we think of more malicious type of approaches to things, but that's not necessarily the case. What you will find is that sometimes you have a user that, let's say they've built some bad code where it's doing some type of recursion and is an infinite loop and is really chewing through somebody's quota for their API calls. Well, why not put a governance rule in for that? If you know that you have let's just say a low volume API where 100 calls per second or 100 calls per minute might be considered, on the cusp of way too high, maybe you would block that. Maybe you would let them know that, hey, you'd start sending back some quota warnings to let them know that, hey, you're kind of chewing up way too much bandwidth on this API. The third one here would be to inform customer success teams about customer issues. So proactively letting those customer success teams know, hey, user X is currently experiencing 500 errors on every single call for the last 100 calls. Then that customer success team can engage engineering and hopefully fix the problem, maybe before you even have to reach out to that customer. Or, customer success team can do, the white glove treatment where they're able to reach out and assist that customer to help them get things resolved. And lastly, and I think this is the most important from a developer experience perspective, is a customized welcome email flow to drive home value. So I'm talking about, we've all seen when we first sign up for a product or an API that we get this, maybe we do a 7-day free trial. We get these 7 first emails. None of them are customized. Maybe on day 1, it says, hey, here's how to do integration. And maybe you haven't integrated by day 3, and it's already telling you about some other product feature, even though you're still having problems with integration. Going with a customized approach to this, what this is going to mean is that you'll be able to do stuff like, hey, you might check, have they integrated? Have they done their first API call? No, they haven't. Okay. On day 2's email, we're going to say, hey, you should still try to do your first API call. And here's a couple of benefits of using this API. On day 3, maybe now at this point, they've made their first call, and maybe you'll be able to see that they're using a specific endpoint, and maybe there's a complementary endpoint, or maybe a more efficient endpoint for them to use. Maybe it was deprecated, whatever. You could send them customized welcome emails in order to get them to the point where they're really experiencing value from the API. Now, let's dig into this just a little bit more, just so you can see. So using emails to guide developers, you're probably going to want to use some type of automated solution for this. Moesif is one of those solutions that you'd be able to use, but there's lots out there that can probably plug into many of the existing systems that you have. Automation is key, and smart automation is key. What you might want to do for emails to guide developers is use metrics to cue that. So you might say, if a user is experiencing more than 500 errors within a 15-minute interval, send them an email to let them know that, hey, the service is down and engineering is currently looking at it. If you have any questions, here's who to reach out to. And you might give them the customer success email, or you might have customer success also follow up with them. Okay. So trying to get that smart automation in is really important from a developer experience perspective. Instead of just saying, letting them figure it out for themselves. Oh, it's getting a 500 error. I'll wait for this company to put out some type of notification on Twitter or something like that. Probably not the best way to proactively engage for developer experience. Another one that we might do is use in-app notifications to anticipate problems users may face. Let's talk about this more from like an API dashboard perspective. When someone is first using an API, maybe they need to generate an API key or something like that through your dashboard. You could use in-app notifications to guide them to that. Hey, there's a lot of overlay style tutorials that you can put in. So you can say, hey, step 1 is here, step 2 is here, step 3 is here. And this is actually, something that a technology like Pendo does really, really well. Now, obviously not as applicable when we're talking about, core API or CLI type of approaches, but most API platforms are going to have some type of dashboard or website or web app where someone can log into. Why not use in-app notifications there? Instead of sending an email, you might also send a notification that says, hey, you're experiencing 500 errors, or you're experiencing 401 errors. It looks like you have an issue with X or Y, to help them and maybe point them towards that great documentation that you're going to be putting together. To revisit this, so stop users from misusing the product or service with governance. So making sure that we want to make sure that we block malicious stuff, but we also want to make sure that we don't have a user, especially if it's a low volume, high cost API that you're charging for. You want to make sure that that they're not absolutely hammering this endpoint and going to end up with a monstrous bill. So, making sure that, okay, they're still able to use the endpoint really easily, but if that API endpoint is being abused on purpose or accidentally, that we're able to block that and let that user know. So maybe we would block them, and then we would also stack these other functionalities together. We'd maybe send an in-app notification to their dashboard and possibly send an email to them saying, hey, you've called this endpoint more than what we expect. Just wanted to let you know that you should maybe take a look at it. And the last thing here that we'll circle around on is alerting customer success teams automatically when certain conditions are met. So as I mentioned, sometimes it's great to be able to have a customer success team that can reach out and proactively and interactively help customers resolve a problem. What we've found with this at Moesif is this is extremely important when people are first integrating with a service, because a lot of the times if they can't integrate and they can't get to the right documentation or the right type of material to help them finish it, they just abandon the product. Why not just get around that instead and hopefully supplement any issues that people are having with some interactive treatment from the customer success team. All right. And that is all from my side. I think now we can take any questions if there are any. But yeah, if you have any that come up later, definitely feel free to reach out to me, Matthew@moesif.com. And we've got lots of API analytics and API centric stuff, including, easy monetization solutions with Moesif as well, which is a newer feature for us that you should check out.
Okay. Thank you very much, Matt, for your presentation. I think it was very, very enlightening and very good to follow as well. And I have a couple of questions. So someone mentioned in the comments a very interesting quote that like finding good documentation is like finding water in a desert. And I want to ask, why do you think that is? Why is good documentation so hard to find?
I'll tell you my honest opinion on it. I think it's because the people writing it are too close to the sun. And I've always thought this, where if you have people writing documentation that are so familiar with the product that they kind of gloss over stuff that maybe you think isn't necessarily common sense. For instance, when we write documentation at Moesif, what I tend to do is I will write it. Sometimes we'll have the engineering team take a look at it, but then we'll go through, usually in a pair, and go through and make sure that we haven't missed a step. Is there something here that we're missing? Maybe a configuration item that we're not doing, or maybe a slight little hint that says, hey, you need to have this enabled in order for this to work. It tends to be those missing steps because people are too close to the actual product itself. So it's either that or the documentation just doesn't exist. And in that case, really, it's about looking at your overall documentation strategy and saying, as a new developer, which is where developer experience starts with new developer, I would say that's where it's most impactful. If the documentation exists, I'm a new developer. Now I need to go through and map out this journey to figure out what docs are most important, rank it, and then hammer those docs out.
Okay. Thank you very much. On a slightly related note, I want to ask, so from your perspective, what do you think is the biggest thing that companies or maybe individual developers or organizations, what is the biggest thing that they get wrong about developer experience?
I would say the biggest struggle would be with the onboarding experience and it not being customized. So when you have a developer who is highly experienced and you have a developer who's maybe greener to the field and you're sending them the same type of onboarding, I mean, that is generally what we do as companies. But as automation gets smarter and we have more metrics to pull off of, that's where I think we'll see the biggest improvement and where we currently screw up a lot of the time. Because you have a lot of times when people abandon something, it's usually in the onboarding portion of it. And it's usually because they don't understand it. And that could be a skills gap. It could be many things. But I honestly think that tailoring that onboarding based on experience is where a lot of companies get things wrong.
Okay, thank you. I want to ask a final question. We talked a little bit earlier before going live about some of your experiences at dealing with a lot of responsibilities and working on distance as well. And I want to ask you to maybe talk a little bit about that. How do you handle these difficult times as someone who works with developer relations and having to take on additional responsibilities?
Yeah, so developer relations is such a diverse role, right? I mean, a lot of the time, most of the roles that I've had in developer relations have kind of come across marketing, sales, product, and then you're looking at stuff that kind of engineering centric too, where you're talking about, deep dive tutorials and documentation. I would say the best way to handle it from a developer experience perspective is to just dive in and handle whatever you can. And I think that goes too from, like, if you're an engineer, you should definitely try and bulk up and maybe learn how to do blog or learn how to write documentation. If you're a salesperson, maybe you should also learn some of the more deep technical stuff. I think that in the current climate that we have in tech, the best way to make sure that you and your company are resilient is to just try and be as cross-functional as you possibly can, because generally you have more skills than what your job description entails, right? So that would kind of be, I guess, at a high level, what I would say.
Thank you very much for that answer. And I want to thank you for your time and for your presentation. I encourage all of you to check out Moesif. And I hope you have a good rest of your day, Matt. And thank you for coming.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Simon. Take care.